Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry for my voice. I got a bit sick over the weekend, but I'm recovering, so you have to deal with my voice. But today I want to talk about tackling temporal troubles. This is of course a talk about dates in JavaScript, more specifically about the new temporal date API. And my name is Fynn Ellie. I use they, them pronouns. I work here at Factorial as a front-end developer. Usually I specialize in accessibility, but of course as part of my front-end work I also do JavaScript quite extensively. And I'm also a Star Wars and Star Trek nerd, and that will become important later on. You can find me on the interwebs on my website, fynn.be, and here you can see a cute cat and myself. So without further ado, let's get into it. The trouble with times. This is of course a reference to the infamous Star Trek original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. Tribbles are these little fur balls you can see up there, which reproduce at an exponential rate, kind of like the problems with the JavaScript date API. So let's take a date, 10th June 2025, for example, which is today, surprise, surprise. So how can we store this in JavaScript? We can, of course, use the JavaScript date API. We can flop the string in there, and out we get a date object, which we can use for further stuff. So when we then stringify this, so every time I stringify stuff, like what you get in your console, for example, I put it underneath in black text. So we would get Tuesday, June 10, 2025, but then we also get this time component, 2 a.m. in the morning. So this is a thing about the JavaScript date API. It always has time. And when we change location, for example, to Los Angeles, we get a somewhat different date, Monday, June 9 at 1700 hours, because this always prints in the user system local time zone. So that is an issue. We can try to work around this. For example, we could use to ISO string, and then we get this format. We can maybe chop off the time component. But this is like a technical format to display dates, and maybe you want to be more user-friendly. So you can use to locale date string, for example. But this gives us back the same issue from before. It gives us Tuesday, 10th June 2025 here in Hamburg. But in Los Angeles, it gives us Monday, 9th June 2025. So we can specify a time zone. We can force it to UTC. So that gives us the correct date. But that's, of course, a lot of working around the issues of the date API. You have to be aware of this, of these time zone issues if you want to work with just dates. So what else is there? So the hit list of bad date API design. We just looked at the limited time zone support. So there's basically only 2 time zones that are supported by the date API, which is UTC and the user's system time zone, nothing else. Then we have mutability. So when you want to change something about a date, for example, change the day or minutes or seconds or whatever, then you always mutate the original date object. So you always have to keep in mind that you maybe want to clone your date beforehand. Then there are a few high-level API methods. So if you want to do any sort of calculations with date, you have to do this whole get minutes plus 10 and set minutes, put that in, and hopefully you cloned your date because everything is mutable. Quite bad. And then there are the design inconsistencies. So the zero-based months, for example, are famously an issue. And also, does anyone have any idea what this gives you, the get year method? Any guesses?
The 2 last numbers in the year?
Yeah, close. Yeah, so it would give us 125, because of course in the year 2000, in 1995, no one saw the year 2000 coming. So yeah, there's get full year, but of course you have to remember that you need to use that. So how did we end up here? And of course, it was a white dude who thought he is Superman. That white dude was Brandon Eich, who invented JavaScript back in 1995 in just 10 days and basically copied everything that was bad with Java. And that included the date API from Java, which Java then ditched because everyone thought it was really bad. But JavaScript kept it basically until today. And yeah, but let's get him off here. He's a bad person. So it's time for temporal technology. So here we can see a screenshot from Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, the Klingon bird of prey starship doing a slingshot maneuver around the sun to get back to the future. So let's take our date again from today, 10th June 2025. But now we are using the new temporal plain date API. We put in our date string, and this will always give us this date back without any time or time zone component. So you're working on dates only. You can, of course, format it with to-locale string into a more user-friendly format, for example, Tuesday, 10th June 2025. And this is just one of the new plain date APIs from Temporal. There are a whole lot more. So let's look at some real-world use cases. So we just saw the plain date API. That is useful if you want to store a single day from a calendar. So let's take a different example, Easter of 2026. We can use the plain date API to store something like this, a specific date in a calendar where the time is not important. But of course, sometimes time is important. And there's a new concept in Temporal that's called wall clock time. That is time independent of any time zone. So something, imagine you have a clock on your wall and that time is what is referred to as the wall clock time. And for example, an alarm clock time, you can use the Temporal plain time API to store something like this. So you have just a time without any date. You can combine those two, the date and the time. So for example, let's take January 1st, 2026 at 0. So that is New Year's, of course. We can use temporal plain date time to have a date and a time, but without a time zone. So that is important. This refers to this specific time regardless of time zone. We also have calendar month and day without a year. So this is interesting for events that recur every year on the same day. So for example, 10th of October is World Mental Health Day. So you can use the plain month day to store recurring events. And there's also a calendar year and month API where you can store a whole month. So let's take the current month June, which is of course Pride month, so you can store this with the plain year month API. There is no plain month API because then you can just like store the month as a number or something, but keep that in mind, no plain month. So these are all the plain APIs which are without any time zone. But of course, the final frontier are time zones. So here we can see a screenshot from Star Trek Picard where a shuttlecraft hovers above a space station. How do we deal with time zones? So we have our date again, we add our time component. So this meetup started at 1900 hours and we are in the Europe-Berlin time zone. And for this, we can use the temporal zoned date time API. And this is a whole new concept for dates in JavaScript where you explicitly add a time zone, a named time zone to your date. And this always stringifies as this original time zone. Temporal adds the UTC offset, but that is also time zone transition aware. So when you have a time zone transition, for example, summertime to normal time, that changes. And you can, of course, make it pretty with the toLocale string, and that gives you something in a nice human readable format. And then there's this fun thing called with time zone. This changes the time zone to a different time zone, so it basically converts your date. So if you have, for example, an online event and want to display the time in another time zone, you can call with time zone, and that gives you the date in a different time zone. So in this case, it would be 10th June at 10 in the morning. And the important thing with temporal is all these methods never mutate the original temporal object. So you don't have to remember to clone your date beforehand. You always get returned a new temporal object. So that is quite handy. And then there's also something completely new that wasn't previously possible with JavaScript, and that is durations. So here we have Scotty, Montgomery Scott, who famously under-promises and over-delivers to keep up his reputation. So let's say we want to fix a light bulb and takes 1 hour, 30 minutes at least. And here we can use the temporal duration API, which takes this funky string. We're going to talk about these types of strings later. And this is then a temporal duration object, which you can also print in a more user-friendly format. So toLocale string would give you 1 hour, 30 minutes. But the cool thing about durations is you can do a lot of other stuff in combination with other temporal APIs. So let's say, for example, we have a delay and want to put this into a set timeout. So here we can call the total method and get milliseconds back. So you can convert from temporal objects to, in this case, plain milliseconds, put it in a set timeout, and it just works. Or we can use it to calculate with temporal dates. So let's say we want to add 2 days to a date, and we again take our date from before, add our 2 days, and how we are doing this is by basically calling the add method with a temporal duration, and that changes our date to 2 days into the future. So here you can see we have a zone datetime, we combine it with a temporal duration, and out we get a new date. So these temporal methods or APIs all work together quite nicely. And then, of course, we have like some special dates. Does anyone have any idea what might be special about 26th of October at 2 in the morning? Something that might happen?
Summer.
Yeah, correct. So when we do the stuff from before, where we are adding, in this case, 2 hours, temporal is, of course, time zone transition aware. So it doesn't show 26th of October at 4 a.m., but 3 a.m. because a time zone transition from CEST to CET is happening. So this is also something you don't have to think about. Temporal just does it for you. So did someone come up with like how many days? Nope? Okay. Let's use a computer to figure that out. So temporal.now is all about getting the current date and time. So we can use that to get the current date and time. In this case, only the date because we are interested in days. And then we can use until, give it a second date and time, in this case, the date of Halloween, and it gives us back a temporal duration object. So we can then, of course, make it a bit more beautiful with toLocale string and get back 144 days until tricks or treats. So this is again an example how all these different temporal APIs work together to form a bigger picture. So I promised you to talk about a bit about strings, string theory, not the physics string theory, no worries. We are talking about ISO strings. So this is an ISO date time string. Everything marked in red is basically hard-coded parts of the format, and everything in black is something where you fill out values, basically. So let's go through it really quickly. First, you have your years, your months, your days. Then separated with a T, you have hours, minutes, seconds. And if you want to be like really precise, you can go up to nanoseconds. Then you either specify a Z for UTC, or you can add a UTC offset in hours and minutes. You can also add a named time zone. And something new in Temporal, support for different types of calendars. So usually we, as Western people, work with the Gregorian calendar, but there are other calendars, for example, the Chinese calendar. So that is also a new feature previously not available in JavaScript. And depending on which Temporal API you use, not everything you see here is required. So for example, for a plain date, you only need the year, month, day part. But for example, a zoned datetime now requires that you specify a time zone. So that is a core part of that Temporal API. And similar for the ISO duration format. So this always starts with a P, and then you have the year, the months, the weeks, the days. Then separated with a T, you have hours, minutes, and seconds. And here, everything is optional, basically. So if you want to only specify 2 hours, you can say P, T, 2, H. So that's how these duration strings work. They look a bit like weird and wonky at first, but there's a system. But of course, like, these are really nice if you work with an API, for example, to serialize a date, talk to a backend. They are great for interchange. But if you're working in JavaScript only, there's a nicer way, and that is objects. So everywhere where you can put in an ISO date or duration string, you can also put in objects which are a lot more readable. You also have numbers there, so actual numbers, so you can do calculations with them. So both work, strings and objects. You can pick and choose whatever fits. The same goes for durations. They can also put in objects. So that was already a lot, but there is so much more. I'm not going to talk about that. So you have a lot of conversion methods. So you can convert between different types of temporal objects. So for example, from a plain date to a zone time, datetime, back and forth. You have calculation methods. We already looked at addition, but there's also subtraction. For durations, you have getting the absolute value, the negated value, rounding, and we looked at total. Comparisons, so this is really handy. You can check if a date is before or after a date, if dates equal each other. And we looked at until, how many days until Halloween, but you have also since, so how many days in the past. And then there are a lot of properties you can get back. There's so much more stuff. It doesn't fit on the slide, so you can ask how many hours are in a day, are we in a leap year, how many days in a month, stuff like that. So there's really quite a lot you can do with temporal. And there's a sad part about this all, and that is a browser support. So there's like one green column, and that is Firefox. Firefox implemented temporal in version 139, and that has been available for like 2 or 3 weeks now. So if you want to play around with temporal, you have to like dust off Firefox. And it's working there, fully implemented. Safari has it partially implemented behind a flag, and Chrome is allegedly working on it. Unfortunately, temporal is not part of Interop 2025, so who knows if we'll get it this year, but like fingers crossed, maybe Safari and Chrome like get their act together and also deliver temporal, because dates in JavaScript are hard and temporal makes it so much easier. If you want to learn more about temporal, the one go-to documentation is on MDN. Everything is documented there. It's really quite extensive. It's like hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation, but like written in, it's written understandably. Or you can, of course, dig into the TC39 proposal, which is also okay to read, actually. So it has a lot of like background information up front. So it's worth like digging into that too if you are interested. And we unlocked the secret bonus slide. Thank you to Miriam Suzanne for letting me use her design for this slide. And thank you for listening to this talk. And if you want to check out the slides, you can scan this QR code or go to the URL and yeah, learn more about temporal. It's really quite a cool new way to work with dates in JavaScript. It's actually fun now. So. Yeah. If you have any questions, then feel free, go ahead and ask whatever you want. And
check.
Yeah,
this one is on.
Niklas will bring you the mic. Thank you.
Yeah, to your first problem with Los Angeles and Hamburg, for example. So I couldn't really see this solved with temporal. So we have a server, for example, in Europe. We call the browser in Europe and have 10th of June, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if we call the same customer in Los Angeles, then we would see the Europe time. What is the problem? Although it is 9 hours earlier, and how would temporal fix this in the front end then?
Yeah, so the problem with the date API is that when you print a date, it's always in the time zone of the user. So that might be what you are after, but if you are not aware of this fact, it can lead you into like this trap that a date might appear as something different for someone else. And in temporal it's always explicit. So in temporal it's always the original time zone you specified, and if you then want to display it in a different time zone, you have to explicitly tell the zone datetime, do it in this time zone. You can do the same ish with the date API when you use to locale date string. You can specify a different time zone, but it's like a workaround through the pretty printing process.
But would not temporal then realize, okay, I'm called in...
Would you use the mic? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. And would not temporal realize that it is called in Los Angeles by the local environment?
No,
parameters.
that's by design not the case. So it will always give you back the date you specified. And you can, of course, still get the user's local time zone and convert to that time zone, but it's now a process you have to do explicitly. It's no longer, no longer some magic behind the scenes.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. My question is why temporal? Because we're working with dates, and temporal means like temp files or something like temporary, and says temporal sounds like it's something temporary, not dates.
Yeah, I don't really know the history of the naming, to be honest. I assume there was a lot of bike shedding going on about that, and date is already used by the date API, so we could have called it date 2 or whatever. I guess they search for something that sounds fancy.
First of all, thank you for this awesome talk. It was really nice following you. For me, I have some mixed feelings about temporal. On the one way, it really solves problems that were difficult to tackle in the past. But from my point of view, the temporal API solves these issues by unloading tons of abstractions onto the developer. So you have like a full framework where you have to learn all these different APIs. In comparison, when you do some like a Unix timestamp, which is used UTC time, and you can just do calculations. So you get a date, convert it to a timestamp, and then you know 1 minute has 60 seconds in JavaScript times 1,000. So from my point of view, this is an API. You can learn it in like 20 minutes if you know the physics of time, and then you can solve exactly the same problems with calculations. What is your opinion about that? You learned temporal probably pretty good compared to like the old school Unix timestamp way. What's your experience? Was it easy to learn these new APIs, or could working with Unix timestamps be an alternative?
Yeah, so it is quite easy to get into temporal. So once you start digging around, everything clicks into place. But I mean, I totally see the point, and temporal has a kind of escape hatch for this exact use case. And we can quickly look at that. It's called the temporal instant. So temporal instant is basically all about this, basing time on the Unix timestamp. So if you are not interested in all the high-level API abstraction that temporal provides you, you can always go back to working with Unix timestamps. So if there are any use cases, it's still totally possible to do that.
It's probably much less readable working with Unix timestamps. I agree on that, but I think the temporal API is quite heavy.
It is a lot. Yeah, no doubts about that. I mean, I showed you the slide which didn't fit on the screen, like intentionally didn't fit. So there is a lot in temporal, a lot to learn. The cool thing is a lot of stuff you learn for one temporal API is transferable to the other temporal APIs. So a lot of stuff is very similar. So all these plain methods, for example, they all behave kind of the same. Zone datetime is like this one special case where you have the time zone attached to it. But other than that, there are a lot of different temporal APIs that are pretty much the same. Thank you very much.